Hello and welcome to week 7 of PUBH612. Today we will review process theory for program evaluation. The learning objectives for this week are to articulate the inputs and outputs of a service utilization plan of a program and to justify the inputs and outputs of the organizational plan of a program. We've now moved into the section of the course which will discuss implementing and monitoring a health program. As you can see in this graph, the implementation phase requires the highest level of effort for a sustained amount of time. Ideally, the implementation of the program will be in line with the program theory and the purpose of the program. Health programs can be viewed as mini organizations, and therefore the same considerations you would give to the inputs, outputs, and outcomes of an organization can also be applied to the implementation of a health program. The organizational plan includes some of the resources listed here. The type and amount of each of these resources will vary based on the intervention used. We will discuss these different types of resources in greater depth in the next few slides. Human resources cover the quantity and quality of the personnel needed to deliver the health program, their expertise, experience, and capabilities. Human resources are almost always the largest portion of any program budget. And you must consider not only the wages, which are paid hourly, or salaries, which are paid monthly for personnel, but also the costs of things like fringe benefits, such as health insurance, as a percentage of the wage or salary. You also need to consider whether your program or intervention requires staff with certain licenses or certifications. You should be asking yourself if there are regulatory requirements which must be met. For example, some interventions may require a medical doctor or a licensed clinical social worker to implement the program. Once you've hired the appropriate staff, training them is a key aspect of HR management. Without training, the quality of the intervention may be compromised, and the intervention which participants receive may not be standardized. Training helps to align theory and use and connect the espoused theory with effect theory. This will help to achieve desired program outcomes and ultimately the long-term success of the program. As we mentioned earlier in the semester, it is important to consider the cultural diversity of your staff in relation to the program participants, and if possible, to conduct cultural competency training to help staff be sensitive to and tailor messages appropriately for different populations. Lastly, volunteers can be human resources in health programs. One way to utilize volunteers is to establish community advisory boards or councils to get their guidance and buy-in. Volunteers can also be a great resource and sometimes are used to implement programs. However, it is important to ensure that volunteers are also appropriately trained and supported, just like staff. Here are some of the physical resources you may need for program implementation. This is rather straightforward, but it's important to make sure you have the materials and other physical resources needed to successfully implement a program or intervention. This should be reflected in your budget. For instance, if you're planning to host a HIV testing event in a community, but you don't have any rapid HIV test kits, the event obviously won't work. The knowledge and experience of staff are sources of informational resources, as are their professional networks and street smarts. It's important to recognize the skills and knowledge that staff bring into the job, as well as the skills that they develop during the program, and to modify their roles to appropriately match that growth. Retention of staff is an important issue for health programs. The qualities of managers are also key program resources. Their organizational abilities, communication and negotiation skills, their ability to lead and build teams, as well as cope with complex tasks, is critical. Lastly, managers should also have technical skills, such as perhaps basic scientific or practice knowledge, which will enable them to adequately supervise and guide other staff. Now that we've covered the inputs, here are some of the organizational plan outputs. These outputs can be measured and used to monitor if the inputs are being used effectively. For example, timelines can be used to keep activities coordinated and on track to meet deadlines. Other outputs are the operations manual, a scope of work or other big organizational policies, the organizational chart and staff descriptions, and the information system, which will capture, hold, and organize data, as well as the budget. Here are some of the inputs to the service utilization plan. Social marketing, also called health marketing, includes the 4 P's of classic marketing: product, place, price, and promotion. Some additional P's which you can consider are partnership and policy. Other inputs include program screening and distinguishing between the intended population, the entire population in need of the program, versus the intended audience, which is the segment of the population for which the intervention is planned. You should consider if participants will have to wait to participate, so things such as queuing, and program delivery, so how will the program be delivered. Ideally, only members of the intended audience will receive the health program, but this can be hard to achieve. Overinclusion is when some of the participants are not part of the intended audience. This may dilute the estimated program effects on the target audience's outcomes. It also may falsely increase the estimated size of the target audience. Underinclusion is when some members of the intended audience do not receive the program. And when this happens, too few participants may make it difficult to detect program effects. More intensive services to a small group may inflate the true program effect or increases the cost per participant. Here are some ways to minimize over and under inclusion. Once the intended population has been identified, screening tests, sensitive and specific, can be used to minimize over and under inclusion. Test sensitivity is the probability that the screening test is positive when an illness or need is present, aka its ability to identify true cases. Test specificity refers to the probability that the test is negative when there is no illness, aka its ability to identify true negatives. Using a specific and sensitive screening tool helps to improve program effectiveness and efficiency. A good targeted marketing plan is also a way to minimize over and under inclusion and make sure you recruit the right participants for the program. While intervention delivery requires the most effort, it should be easier if you've done a thorough job planning and have a well thought out process theory. If you've done that legwork, you just follow the developed protocols and procedures. Another way to ensure that intervention delivery is a success is to pilot test the program prior to full-scale implementation. There are several ways to do this, as you can pilot test the actual intervention or specific evaluation instruments such as survey questions. Pilot testing is an underutilized and excellent resource. Here are some service utilization plan outputs, such as the number of units of service provided, the quantity of services completions, the materials developed to provide the health program, and the workflow. Recording the various outputs as the program is implemented can help you to conduct a process evaluation later on. It can be very helpful to identify where things maybe went awry or what kept you on track. Your text also describes how logic models can be used as a tool for program planning and evaluation. A logic model is a diagram in a table format that shows the relationship of inputs and activities to outputs and immediate and long-term outcomes. A logic model is a one-page summary of the program theory. And here you can see a hypothetical logic model for the neural tube defect health program and the interventions they've chosen to address the health problem. The key takeaways for this week are to remember that the implementation phase requires the most effort, but with proper planning and a sound theoretical underpinning, implementation should be manageable. An organizational plan includes many inputs and it requires consideration, but if it's done well, your health program should yield the desired outputs. And furthermore, organizational outputs can be used as tools for measurement in a process evaluation. Lastly, there are many ways to ensure that service utilization plan inputs yield the desired outputs and with the right recipients. I hope this week's lecture helped you to think through some of the additional details surrounding program implementation. Here are some additional resources you can find on the internet. Please check Blackboard for other readings, and I'll see you next week.